If you Google the phrase work-life balance, you'll get 265 million hits. There's lots of information on this so-called balance, but not as much on the practical perspective of what works and what doesn't work for people. Today, my guest and I tackle the practical application of work-life balance. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 123.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. This is a weekly coaching show to help us all be better leaders through improved communication, human relations, and personal productivity, the people side of business and organizations. Welcome back. I'm so glad to have you as a listener this week to the show. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome. So glad to have you. This is the show for folks who care about results and care about being effective and want to do it in a way that is going to align well with serving people, taking care of people in our organizations and in our work. And, oh, by the way, in our personal lives and our families too. And you've probably already picked up, if you've listened to the show for a while, that I'm a big believer in the importance of this term we hear thrown out a lot called work-life balance. And although I fall short a lot of the time, I am always trying to do whatever I can to be more effective at being able to have that balance. And I know a lot of us are always struggling with that. And you may remember, if you've listened to the show for a bit, that back in episode 106, I had John Corcoran on the show. And John was on to talk about building your personal network. And it's a great episode, by the way. So I encourage you to go check it out if you haven't already listened to it, and especially if that's something that's a goal of yours for this year to build your network. John and I started talking back and forth, though, and emailing here and there, and John is great at practicing what he preaches, and it was reaching out to me recently on putting me in touch with someone that he thought would be a good guest, a future guest here on the show, and we started to talk, and it turns out that John and I have a lot in common. So one of the things we have in common is we both are in households that both parents work. We both have a small child at home already, and both of us are expecting kids coming up here in the month of February 2014. So we're both about to get a lot busier in our homes. And as we started emailing back and forth this last week or two, I suddenly thought, this would be a great opportunity for both of us just to share our perspective on how we're approaching this transition in our lives from a personal perspective, but also from how we're approaching it from a business perspective and how we think about this and tackle this work-life balance topic. It's one that you see a lot of information out there on, but I really wanted to get into the details of what do each one of us do around work-life balance. And so John and I sat down last week, had a chat about work-life balance, how each of us applies it in our lives and with our families and our work, and I hope you find it helpful. So here's my conversation with John Corcoran. Hey everybody, it's Dave Stachowiak from the Coaching for Leaders show, and I've got my buddy John Corcoran with me. Hey John.
Hey there, Dave. We're doing a joint episode. This is exciting.
Yeah, so I've never done this, and we don't know how this is going to go.
We're completely amateurs here.
Yeah, exactly. So, what was interesting, we had talked, John, you were on my show, 4, 5, 6 months ago, talking about networking, and so we had just been talking over email a bunch since then. And, it turns out that you guys are having a baby coming up here in February.
And the funny thing is, so are you. So I don't know how we planned this, but somehow you and I both expecting a baby within a month or so. And so you made the brilliant suggestion a couple of days ago of why don't we get on the phone and record a joint episode where we talk a little bit about work-life balance and what we're thinking on the eve of both of our second child's birth. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. We start talking about this over email of like, okay, what are you doing? How you handling the car seats and all that stuff? And are the bags packed for the hospital? And I was thinking,
and the answer to all that is no.
same here on a number of those. And so, it's interesting, John, whenever I get together with clients, and we share having small kids at home in common, we end up spending time before, after the meeting, always talking about kids and parenting. Yeah. And I actually just had this conversation this morning with a client. We were talking all about work-life balance and how does that work? And I'm always so curious, like what people do with their schedules and communication with their families. And I just, it's one of those things we don't talk about a lot of times formally in organizations and in business. And I thought it'd be really neat if you and I just kind of talked about what we're doing and what we're struggling with and how we're trying to make some sense of how we balance our work and personal lives. And hopefully it'll be valuable for people as we dialogue about that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be valuable for people, whether they have young kids at home or not, whether they're just really busy with their job or busy with school or busy with taking care of elderly parents. It's an issue that's facing so many people these days. How do you deal with balancing having a life and also balancing, having a job or having a business and keeping that afloat? And so I'm the same way. I'm constantly devouring information from other people about how to maintain that. And I guess the first thing we should probably talk about is that term, work-life balance. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of people have kind of debunked it and said it's not even possible to achieve a balance of some sort, or maybe you can't measure it in the short term. You need to measure it over the longer term. Do you agree with that? Do you think it's possible to achieve work-life balance, Dave?
For me, it's like sitting on one of those stools we had this stool at our house that's in Bonnie's office. And it's one of those stools that you sit on and it kind of works your core, John. And so
yeah.
you sit on it and it kind of leans you to one side and you sort of have to work like your abdominal muscles in order to get back into the center.
Really interested in seeing where you're going with this. But
yeah. So it's like you're never really in balance, but because you're trying to stay in balance on it, you get stronger, at least in theory, if you sit on it long enough. And
gotcha.
I kind of think of work-life balance like that is, for me, I'm constantly falling out of balance, but that my goal is to move back towards balance on a regular basis. So it's kind of like I'm always trying to stay sort of centered in that circle. On any given day, I'm going to be on one edge or one side or the other. But if I'm sort of generally in the center, I feel like I'm doing pretty well and I'm getting stronger and I'm getting better at being able to respond quickly.
It's a good way of looking at it. You're constantly in the process of trying to strengthen those muscles so that you can remain balanced. You shared a great quote from the Xerox CEO, Ursula Burns. She said in the Wall Street Journal that it's a fool's journey to try to achieve the perfect balance between one's professional and personal lives. She said that she was talking about women here, but they should get comfortable with the idea of taking your entire life to find balance. So do you agree with that? Do you think that it should be measured over the course of whether you have balance over your entire life?
Yeah, I think the question, yes, I do in general agree with the kind of her philosophy of this, of not worry so much about an individual day or an individual week, and think about, okay, what is the longer term objective of what you're trying to latch onto? And I know for me, I mean, that quote from Ursula Burns has brought me a lot of peace. And actually, it just happened today, John. I work out of my home primarily. And so I came back at a client meeting this morning up in LA, and I drove back just about an hour ago. I came in, and Luke was really happy to see me. And then when it was apparent I was going back to work, because I needed to chat with you and do a few other things this afternoon, then he was really, really fussy and did not want to see me leave. And I so wanted to just like hang out and play with him. I really did. And yet that quote reminds me, I mean, you're never going to make everyone happy. I mean, it's just never possible. That quote really reminds me to have perspective of like, okay, just because today I didn't spend as much time with him does not mean I'm a bad father or I don't have life balance. It just means I had a really busy day, and that's why we had someone here caring for him, and that's why Bonnie's schedule was different. So it's, for me, that gives me peace. And anything that gives me peace, I think is a good thing,
Yeah, it is. That's definitely true. There's one part I disagree with with the statement is that I don't think that it's a healthy thing to think that later in your life you'll find that balance. Like there's, this golden ring that you'll suddenly discover when you turn 50 or 60 or something like that. I think that what you should try and do is find balance, but average it out over different periods of time. So sure, you're going to have busy weeks, busy months, but if you continue at that pace for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months of just working yourself to death, I mean, people can't handle that pace, and they will collapse. They'll not be able to take it. So I think you really need to build into your schedule on not just a week, an annual basis, but maybe a monthly or quarterly basis, and even down to a daily basis. And I think we're going to get into some more practical tips as we go along here. But, one thing I've engaged in a lot in the last year is planning out my day. And one piece of advice I've read a couple times is to work in these little breaks in your day that can really help with balance or help you feel more at peace, so that rather than, working all day long, like a 10-hour day working, you actually have like maybe a 10-15 minute break built into your schedule so that you can get a little respite and then get back at it. And so you don't completely deplete your energy on a daily basis. But I think it's important to do that, not just on a daily basis, but, weekly, monthly, and an annual basis. Work in, those weekly vacations, family vacations, and work in a weekend where you're not going to work at all. You're not going to be checking the smartphone all the time. You're going to be present with your family. Those sorts of approaches I think are really helpful for achieving balance, even if it's not possible to achieve the perfect balance, as Burns says in the quote in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's why I hesitated when you asked me if I agreed with it, because I generally agree with the philosophy, but I think where it breaks down for me is when you think of it over a whole lifetime. To me, that's a little long. I think that, having a busy day or a busy week is okay once in a while and necessary, but when you get into the point of it being months, that's the kind of thing that does throw you off balance and throws your family off balance. And so that's something that's really present of mind for me, is trying to figure out, okay, what can I do, even if it's just a little thing today that keeps me going a little bit back toward balance, even if I'm not perfectly where I want to be. And, I think that for me, John, brings up another question, which is kind of like, what are we even trying to achieve? Because I know Bonnie and I have had some conversation about this in the last few months of, what do we want to see our family schedule look like? And so when you think of work-life balance, what's your objective? What are you trying to achieve on an ongoing basis with your family, John?
Oh, man, that's a tough question, isn't it?
Yeah. That's why I asked you first.
I guess when you really break it down, there's going to be, even whole weeks where where you have just really bad weeks, very busy weeks, and this week is probably an example of one for me. I've just been tremendously busy. But then you have other times that are not as busy, and to try and enjoy those times as well. But the other point I was going to make is that by trying to build into even your daily work schedule little breaks throughout the day, it has an effect on your home life, because it makes you a happier person. It makes you a more satisfied person. And as long as I think as far as your goals go, as long as you're constantly trying to improve and constantly trying to find different ways to achieve happiness at work and at home, and ways that, finding little tools and strategies and tricks that can be working towards trying to create more balance in your life, then that's a good thing. You may not always achieve it, but just throwing up your hands is not an option. Just giving up is not an option.
Yeah.
So, what I really expect, the type of people that I really like, the people that I gravitate towards, are people that are constantly trying to improve themselves, and that are reading new books, that are learning new things, that are applying new things, because those are the people who really grow and who really even if they don't achieve the optimal balance, at least they're trying, and that can lead to a tremendous sense of satisfaction. Is just that you're trying to achieve balance for your family, and your family will know it; they'll feel it.
Cool. I like it. Yeah, and that actually is what when I thought about this question for myself, I thought of two things. One, nobler goal, and one really selfish one. So my larger nobler goal is that Bonnie gets the kind of attention that I want to provide as a husband, if not always on a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis. And that Luke gets the attention that I really want him to get of being, a dad and being a really present dad. And even if he only sees me some days for an hour or two a day, that there's other days he sees me a lot more. And that even if it's only an hour, for that hour, I'm really, really present with him fully. So that's like my nobler objective. And then my my more selfish objective would be, I just don't want to have as much guilt. So that's like, if I can get to the end of a week and not feel a lot of guilt, because it seems like whatever side I err on, either I'm like, okay, I didn't work enough this week on some long-term priorities, or I didn't spend as much time with Luke this week as I wanted to, or with Bonnie. It seems like somehow I always end up having a little guilt either way. But if I can minimize that on a selfish level, I feel like I'm doing okay.
That's actually a great point. And that was actually one point that I wrote down beforehand. So we're definitely in agreement on that, is trying to minimize the guilt. And
Yeah.
I find that it's something that can lead to this waterfall of negative feelings when you get that guilt. It could be something small, like you feel guilty that you're checking social media too long while you're at work and you should be going home, or you feel guilty that you haven't spent enough time with your family. And allowing yourself to relieve yourself of that, to just let it go, is so important, because if you don't, it just leads to such great frustration. And it's why it kind of keeps on coming back to the working world, because if you harbor anxiety and frustration and you're overworking yourself in the working world, that will spill over and affect your family. It'll affect your kids. It'll affect your spouse. So trying to let go of that guilt is really a great thing to do. There's one planning system that I've been trying out and been experimenting with. It's called the Storyline Productivity Schedule.
Oh, interesting.
Have you checked that out before?
No, haven't heard of it.
It's interesting. I was just reading about it, and I've been trying it out the last couple of days. And one of the things they do is it's project-based. So it gives you 3 projects to work on during the day, under the theory that we can't balance too many projects. So you focus on 3 projects that you work on during the day. And this is best for people who are self-directed in their work. But it doesn't assign a time period to it, under the theory that if they were to say 2 hours, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., and people were to start working on it, and then you get to 9:30 and you haven't done a lick of work, then you get this feeling of guilt.
Yeah.
And it harbors, it just ruins the rest of the day. So instead, what they do is they put the time period at the bottom, and you fill in the time period that you spent on that project. So if you spent only an hour and a half, then you write down hour and 30 minutes after you completed the project. And you get this feeling of satisfaction from having achieved it, rather than a feeling of, oh crap, I didn't do the extra 30 minutes that I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's so funny you mentioned that. I haven't heard of that tool, but I've totally given up on trying to figure out how long something's going to take in my calendar, unless it's a formally booked meeting with a client or a phone call or something like that. If it's me working on something or working on a project or writing, I have just gone to having a prioritized list, because I never get it right, John. Every time I either I get a phone call, or it takes me twice as long as which usually is what it is. It takes me twice as long as I thought it was really going to take me. And like you said, as soon as you miss that first part of your calendar for the day, then you feel like you're behind the rest of the day. And I finally, it took me a few years, but I finally realized it doesn't make any sense to do that. And so you just started using that tool. Are there other tools that you're using that help you as far as from a work-life balance standpoint that you found have been really valuable for you?
Well, I think planning period is really important, because the more organized we can be in our activities, the less likely that anxiety is going to spill over into our home life. And so, David Allen, with his Getting Things Done system, he says that you really need to write down all of the things that are in your head, in your to-do list, because that gets them out of your head, and you don't have the stress of knowing that these are things you need to do. You get a little bit of feeling of satisfaction to writing them down. And I totally agree with that. I think that's really important to do. I know not everyone does, but I think that if you experiment with that, that is a great strategy. Another one I use is called, it's at productiveflourishing.com. A guy named Charlie Gilkey, who's up in Portland, who I've interviewed on my podcast before, very smart guy. And he's created these custom planners for different people and different types of jobs. And I use their weekly and their daily planners. And one of my goals for 2014, which, interesting enough, you mentioned your 3 words. We should talk about that because I have 3 words as well.
Oh, cool.
One of my goals is to plan better, and and on a larger scale. So I hope to use more of his different planning documents to plan on more of a quarterly and an annual basis rather than just on a weekly and a daily basis. But how about you? What kind of planning, other than, do you do just a to-do list, or what do you use?
Well, I've gone back and forth over the years of doing lots of different things. And what I'm doing right now, I use a software tool called OmniFocus that helps me to keep, it's a Mac-based product, and it's basically my task management system. So I keep all my projects, everything in there. And then I collect my ideas throughout the day in drafts. So you talked about just getting things out of your head. I'm a big believer in that too. But I'm not really good at doing it in practice. I'm really trying to discipline myself, John, when something gets in my head, of putting it in the drafts app, and I'll process it later. And that's actually really good. It's helpful for a work productivity standpoint, but it's also really good personally too. I've had times where, we'll be talking about something as a family, or I think about something, Luke and I are doing something, and I'll think, oh, I need to schedule his dentist appointment. I haven't done that. And so I'll just open the phone, I'll put it in the app, boom, done. And I don't have to make a big deal out of it, or open up the task management system, or send myself an email or anything like that. So that kind of stuff I really think is helpful. But what I use from a larger perspective this year that's really focusing my thinking is Michael Hyatt came out with this course called Best Year Ever. It's like a 5-day self-paced course that you go through, and you set your goals for the year, 7 to 10 SMART goals. And I didn't do this last year, and I kind of, I changed my strategy last year, just having 3 words, but I decided this year to actually bring back setting some goals. So I have 10 goals that I've got listed out. And what I do on Sunday nights or Monday morning, is I'll sit down and I'll look at that list, and then I'll plan my tasks for the week. And what I think is interesting for me is that most of the goals on my list, of the 10, only 2, let's see, I'm looking at it here, only 3 of them are really business or professional related. The other 7 are either myself and taking care of myself well, or doing something that's going to really be beneficial for our family and on a personal level. And so I really try to drive my priorities of family and personal just by my planning throughout the year, so that leads to the kind of actions I want to take.
That's great. That's great that you do that. And so the 3 words, you did 3 words 2 years ago and didn't last year, and you have 3 words this year?
I do. I did pick 3 words again this year. Last year, my 3 words were to show up on social media, were flexibility, and were collaboration. And those were kind of the 3 things that I focused on throughout the year. And I really wanted to get better at that, especially from a flexibility collaboration standpoint at home, of really, when you're, and you know this, when you're a parent with small children, you just have to be flexible. Yeah. I shouldn't say you have to be. I suppose you could choose not to be. But if you don't, whoever whoever you're either raising your kids with, either a spouse or partner, or if you are a single parent and have someone else you're relying on, if you are not flexible and collaborative, you are done as far as any sort of happiness in your home. And we've, I think every family has its moments where that doesn't go well, and we've had ours, of course, too. But I think we've been able to minimize it well by both being flexible and collaborative. And one thing, I didn't mention this earlier, John, but as far as one of our objectives, me and Bonnie's, is that we both believe strongly in raising Luke in an environment where he sees us both as equal partners in parenting. And, this is very personal for every family. Every family has their own system for how they do this, but we really want to raise Luke in a home where he sees us as both as leaders, and both in actively parenting, but also both parents having professional things that they do and they enjoy doing and that they love to do. And so we really work hard to balance our schedule and our time, sometimes by necessity, but also because we really want to have Luke be equally parented by us. And we do our kind of, last time I checked and kind of just did some figuring on it, we were within a couple hours a week of equal time as far as how much time we spend as caregivers to him. And that's really important to us. And, it's not possible for everyone. We're both lucky to have and blessed to have professional lives that allow for that and that flexibility. But that's a really, really important thing. So it requires, though, a ton of collaboration. So our family runs on the iCloud calendar system. I mean, Bonnie's got hers, I've got mine, Luke has his own calendar. Everything's color coded. I can look on my iPhone and see exactly where everyone is at any point, or at least what the calendar says it's supposed to be. That is huge for us. Without that, I don't know how we would keep it all straight. So that tool for sure, and that principle is central to our life balance system.
Wow, that's great. And it sounds like have there been any struggles with that? Like, have there ever been any setbacks? I know Luke isn't too old, so you probably haven't reached that point yet. Like, I'll give an example. In my home, my wife works, and she has an hour commute one way, hour in the morning, hour in the evening. And I, for that reason, if my son is sick, and I'm self-employed, so if my son is sick, I'm the one who picks him up. I'm the one who takes him to the doctor to the extent possible. At the same time, if I'm not working, I'm not making money, so we kind of balance it out. Sometimes she's going to take some of her sick leave, and then the other thing we do is because of that long commute, she prioritized taking Fridays off. So she worked it into her schedule. She works in academia, so she worked it into her schedule so that she could take Fridays off and be with him full time on Fridays. Which,
nice.
Frankly, I wish I could do that. Yeah. I wish I was at the point of doing that. But it's kind of like, it'd be interesting to look at the hour breakdown in terms of caregiving, because then on the weekend, she and I are 50-50 the whole time. But it'd be interesting to see in terms of hours if it breaks down close to 50-50. I think it still would tilt in my wife's favor because of those Fridays.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to imply that either that we shoot for 50-50 all the time too. I mean, there's definitely weeks that I spend more time with Luke and definitely weeks that Bonnie spends more time too. And I don't even necessarily think that it would be helpful for us to do that. And you ask about downfalls. I think one thing that I'll just speak for myself. I'd be curious what Bonnie would say, but I know there are times I get too rigid to that schedule. So I'll be like, okay, well, Bonnie's going to be watching Luke from 3 to 6 this afternoon because she's not on campus today. So I've got that time to work. And then something will change. She'll have a doctor's appointment comes up or something like that. And then all of a sudden I'm on. And I know there have been times I've not been as flexible as I'd like to be, just because I'm like, okay, but we had that booked. Sometimes too much planning can work against you too. I know for me it has, because I think like, okay, I like to have things planned out. Both Bonnie and I are planners. So anytime something changes, I've really had to remind myself continuously of like, okay, it's just the plan. It's, this too will pass. If you didn't get as much done today, we had this happen last week where we had someone who was going to come in and care for Luke we have a couple of people in our lives who are just great blessings to us, who come into our house and care for Luke, several hours a week. And schedules didn't work out and they weren't able to be here. And so all of a sudden a whole day of work that I thought was going to be mine was gone. Because Bonnie had another commitment that she couldn't change. And so, but I said, it's not a big deal. Like, it's one day. And I had a blast with Luke that day. And we had so much fun. I'm like, I'm going to make the most of this day. And so I think for me, one of the things is always just flexibility. And then I think the other big thing is constant communication with the people who are involved. So with extended family, with a partner, with whoever's important to do life with, in your sphere, whether that's family or extended family or friends. I think that constant communication is really a necessity, and particularly with young kids, for us at least.
It is. I was going to ask you, do you and Bonnie, do you have like regular meetings? Do you sit down once a week or once a month and say, let's plan out the next week? Or is it kind of more of a on the fly, you're constantly talking about these things?
Yeah, for us, it tends to be by semester because she's a university professor. And so we'll kind of have those conversations in 4-month increments.
Yeah.
So, because her schedule's the same. Once it's set for the semester, I mean, as far as when she's on campus, meeting with students, all that, it's pretty much stays the same. Whereas my schedule is constantly changing. So I can be the one that can move things around a little bit more. So usually we'll set something, we'll kind of go our 4 months, and then once that semester ends, we'll kind of sit down and figure out the next. But she really takes the leadership role in a lot of that, and I try to be as flexible as I can of making it work with her schedule. And then the other thing we do almost every week, is on Sunday nights we have a standing babysitter, and we go out and we have dinner. And sometimes we talk about schedules, and sometimes we talk about life. But 2 questions we always ask each other at dinner every Sunday night is, what brought you life this week, and what took life away from you this week? And sometimes that's about us and our relationship, and often it's about other things that are going on in our lives. And so for us, that's just a really good time to be able to reconnect and find out what's going on and what isn't working. And it's so important to do, because it's so easy, especially with young kids, for that to become very consuming with your time and resources. And it was funny, what got me thinking about us having this conversation, John, was you put something on social media that you and your wife were going to have a baby moon.
Yep.
Am I getting that term right? So tell me about
right.
that, because that sounded like something that was really intentional too.
Well, so with baby number 1, this was 3 years ago, before Mason was born. We, were living the life. We went and spent a week in the Caribbean. We went on a cruise. We were in Florida. We had a great time. This time we basically got in the car. We drove about 5 hours and we stopped. And then we had 2 nights to ourselves. It's a little bit different when you've got a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't minimize it. I mean, it was really nice to have. We did take a second little baby moon. We went down to Santa Barbara, which is 5 or 6 hours from here, and Mason was with Nicole's parents for the weekend. And it was just, it was not long enough, of course, but it was wonderful. And Nicole and I have never done the nightly or the weekly babysitter like you do. I'm really envious of that. That is something that we probably ought to do, and we know other couples that do that. But definitely taking the time away to do the baby moon, it was so nice, because it can be really tough when you're raising a toddler, and anxieties raise, and tempers flare, and we get into heated arguments from time to time, just like any couple. And so taking the time to go away for 2 days without the kid, even though we missed him, was really nice, because it was a chance for us to reconnect and do some things that we really liked to do before our son Mason came along. And don't get me wrong, he's a total blessing. We love having him around. We wouldn't have it any other way. But, before he came along, we would travel and we would go to different restaurants and experience new things. And that's what we really like to do. And we don't do hardly any of that now, of course.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to do that. And I think that I come back, I know, to work refreshed. And I think our family comes back refreshed, and it buys you some more time, in a sense, because it reminds you for the next 3-4 months or so of the love that you have for your spouse and how much you enjoy spending time with them, even when you're not up to your eyeballs in poopy diapers. So,
for sure.
It's good to do. But, I mean, I know that not everyone listening to this is going to have the resources to be able to get a babysitter once a week, or to do a weekend away. And if that's the case, we've all been there. And I think that you can just try and make things work on a smaller level, whether it's having a relative hopefully watch the kid, to give you some time away with your spouse, or even if it's time away from work with some friends, or some relatives or something like that. Whatever it is that's going to give you a little bit of break. I think it's so healthy to do that. It really is.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it is an investment. I mean, of resources to have a babysitter come on a regular basis, and we've been blessed that we have the resources to do that, and also we think in the long run it's worth that investment for our marriage and for. But that's not possible for everyone. But what is possible for I think all of us is being intentional. That was some great grammar. Huh? Intentional about taking time away and really marking out time where either it's time off the internet or time with just a spouse or a partner or time with or just even time alone. Like you said, having a relative step in once in a while. But I think that even for those who are not at the life stage, you and I are at, John, I know I didn't do this well enough at all before we had kids ever, is to take time to just be. I'm really not good at that at all, of just resting and just relaxing and taking a day off once in a while. Even on weekends, I tend to be pretty productive. Go around, okay, what needs to be done around the house, and what do we need to organize, and what's the next book I need to read? And sometimes it's just really, really good to make that space to unplug, and that's been really helpful for me and for us too.
Yeah, and you don't need a big budget for that. I mean, that's something you can do very easily. My wife and I do that frequently, where we will just, be home in the evening and our son is asleep in the other room, and we sit down on the couch, and maybe have an hors d'oeuvre on the couch that we make, and have dinner together. And as you said, unplugging the cell phone, unplugging the internet is a great thing to do. I saw recently someone who actually purchased a timer that they attach to their internet, so they turn it off at a certain time.
That's
it was
awesome.
In a different context. It was they wanted to go to bed earlier, so it was like this manual, old school looking, physical timer. It's not digital or anything like that, and it just turns off the internet at 10 p.m. or something like that, and then they have to go to bed. And I thought that was cool.
That's so funny you mentioned that, because one of the things that we've tried to do, and we've been poor about doing it recently. Well, actually, Bonnie's been better about it. I've been poor about doing it recently, but is to unplug off the internet for 24 hours, and usually try to do it over weekends, like Saturday night to Sunday night. And that is the first couple times we did it. It's really hard. And then it's really nice, actually, when you get unplugged and really totally Facebook, the whole bit, TV, and just really spend time with each other, because it's so easy to get caught up in that stuff. So that's something that's definitely been really helpful too.
Yeah, another thing I do is I have tried at least to implement systems so that when you're together, more of your time can be spent present with one another. So, for example, I hate writing checks, physically, manually checks, especially on a regular basis if you have to do it every month or so. And there are some that you can't avoid. You have to write certain checks. But I have almost all of our bills on automatic direct bill pay. And then other ones where I can't do bill pay with someone, I'll have my bank go into my bank and have them send an automatic payment, which you can usually do, depending on your bank, through your online service, through their website, so that a check is physically mailed out to them every month. And I think that doing little things like that takes a little bit of time up front, but it saves you from, on a Sunday night, rather than relaxing and being with one another, it saves you from having to be like, oh crap, what do I need to write a check for this or that? I need to do this thing or that thing. It just takes one extra thing off of your mind, so you don't have to worry about doing that.
I totally relate to that, and I did that recently. In fact, our community will know I publish a weekly update each week, and what I was doing for a long time is I was writing the article. I always write the articles each week, but then I would go and I would copy and paste the article into my email management system, and I would format it each week, and it'd probably take me about a half hour, 45 minutes to do, which isn't that long, but I would be doing it every week. And I started thinking, and I think this has been really helpful for me, John, of thinking through kind of everything in life. Like, that is 45 minutes that I can do nothing else. If I do that each week, like that is 45 minutes either away from time reading, away from time I'd spend with Bonnie, away from time with Luke, although I'd normally do it at night, but that is 45 minutes that I do not get back, and that I am making that the most important thing in my life right now. And so I invested some time over the holidays of getting a system set up where it automatically would pull it from the website and do it. And now all of a sudden 30 to 45 minutes a week of what I was spending doing that are gone. And you know what? It looks better too. So, but that little stuff of investing a little bit of time to pick up some efficiencies is just huge. It's just huge.
It makes a big difference. Another thing that we're experimenting with right now is we have a house cleaner who comes to clean, and we were doing it about once every other week for a while. And then when things got busier with baby number 1, we went up to a week. So now she comes once a week. And we're actually, and this some people listening to this are probably going to say, yeah, absolutely do it. Other people are probably going to be saying, what a jerk or an elitist or something like that. But now we're going to have the same house cleaner come for an hour another day of the week. So she currently comes on Thursdays, and we're going to have her come on Mondays and just try it out. It's not that expensive to have her come. And she's going to come and just kind of tidy up and put away the dishes and maybe do a load of laundry, put away the clean dishes in the dishwasher, clean up around the kitchen and everything. Because what happens with us is we're spending so much time doing that stuff, doing a load of laundry, cleaning the dishes in the dishwasher, all that kind of stuff, that it gets in the way of being present with one another. And, I think it's kind of like that investment, like you said, in doing a date night once a week. That I view that as kind of an investment, because it's definitely an investment, because it will free us up from those repetitive tasks and allow us to spend a little bit more time together, which is definitely worth it.
Speaking of time and some of the resources outside of us, we should hit on the professional aspect of this too, because both you and I are in families where both parents work. And so I'm wondering what you guys do, John, with communicating with other people, colleagues, clients. Is there anything that you do or found that is helpful in the professional world that's worked out well, or maybe even hasn't worked out, as far as kind of keeping those boundaries pretty sane for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've kind of touched on some of these issues as we've gone along. But one thing that I've done is what we're doing right now, which is recording podcasts and producing content. Because when you're a service provider like you are, like I am, actually I heard a statistic the other day, 80% of Americans are service providers. We're moving from a product-based economy to more of a service-based economy. And so that's been increasing over the years. So when you're a service provider, you want to check in with people in your network. It's crucially important. I'm always writing about this on my blog. You want to check in with people, and doing something like this where we record it once, it takes an hour of our time, and then we put it up and it'll be on the internet forever, is such an easy and efficient way of communicating in a professional sense. Because after we do it, we'll both record it, we'll both put it on our podcast, we'll put it on our LinkedIn page, we'll share it on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and people in our network will hear it, and we'll refer people to it in the future. I'll have clients or friends or colleagues or people who I meet who talk about work-life issues, and I'll say, listen to my episode, blah, 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 where we talk about work-life issues and might have some good tips for you there. So that's a way of being efficient with your time, because the process of manually checking in with people in your network as your network gets larger becomes more and more time-consuming and more difficult. So you need to scale that process, and using things like writing articles or producing content like podcasts is a great way to do that, and to check in with people and for them to remember where you are. So that's one thing that I would recommend. Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I have a few, and I should just reinforce what you said. I mean, there's so many great, wonderful ways that technology can help us. Technology gets in our way a lot of the times too, of making those genuine connections. But for those who haven't heard it, John did a great job kind of overviewing how to get better at that when you were on my show on episode 106. So I'll put a link to that in my show notes, John, and you can as well, so people can grab that conversation, because I think you have a lot of really good thinking on that. And for me, it's, I have found I'm usually harder on myself than any colleagues or clients would be. It's amazing to me how clear communication in advance can really move mountains. For example, this past semester, our schedule's changing a little bit now, but this past semester, Bonnie was on campus all day on Wednesdays. And so what just made sense in our schedules for me just to be, with Luke on Wednesdays and out. And so I communicated everyone, in my network and, people I interact with on a daily basis who need to know. I said, hey, feel free to reach out to me on Wednesdays. Just know I'm not going to probably respond, and I'm probably not going to get back to you on email, and I'm not likely to answer the phone. And I'll get back to you, either Wednesday night or Thursday morning, more likely. And it's funny because on the occasion where, Luke would be taking a nap or maybe I had a few free hours on a Wednesday and I try to get some work done. And a couple of times I'd have people like, well, I know you can't talk today because it's Wednesday. And I'm like, but I have time now. Like, forget what I said. But it's funny. Like I've also found though that if I start doing some of that, then people, then it's confusing to people. So there have been a few times even that I've had maybe an hour or two to make some calls on a Wednesday that I've said, you know what, I'm better off sticking to the system that everyone knows. And rather than starting to show up on Wednesdays and confusing everybody and then having everyone starting calling me on Wednesdays again, is to do something else. Use that time to do writing, use that time to, do something for our family or to, or to do something that just requires me working on my own, which more often would be what happened. And I found that was really helpful, but just being clear with everyone on what the expectations were. And, I'm really grateful to work in an industry and to have the kind of work that I can do that more so than some people can. And I know for a lot of people don't necessarily have as much of that flexibility, but I do think that more and more businesses and organizations today, John, there's very few now that aren't willing to be flexible in some ways with almost, with a vast majority of employees if they communicate in advance. And I think that that's a really great trend that's happening in the workplace these days. And I think it's something that, if you haven't tapped into or haven't explored and would benefit you and your family, I think is a really important thing for people to do.
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's just the fear that people have. They're afraid that the clients will abandon them, or they're afraid that the boss will not be happy with that. The idea of them, having to build in that flexibility. But you're right, it does start with communication. It does start with talking to people about it. And I found the same thing. People are human. Clients that I've worked with tend to be very understanding. If something comes up, if my son gets sick at school and I have to go pick him up, and I explain to him, I meant to, we were going to meet today. It doesn't happen that frequently, so it doesn't become much of an issue. But when it does come up, people understand. They understand that, everyone's human and you've got a family, and sometimes those things get in the way. And just being honest about it is, a great way to go. I think that's good advice. The other thing I'd recommend for you, for your situation with the, not wanting to communicate people on Wednesday, Boomerang for Gmail. Do you use Gmail?
I don't, no.
Okay. Well,
No.
Boomerang for Gmail is really cool. It allows you to send delayed messages. There's probably something similar for your email system. But so you could type an email to a client on Wednesday while Luke is napping and have it be sent out at 8 a.m. Thursday morning.
I did used to have that functionality with Outlook, and I know there are some services that do that. And David Sparks was on my show a few weeks ago and has talked about some of the new email services that came out. And so I'm going to look into that just because I do think that there's some value sometimes in composing something having go out later, if it's not something that's time sensitive or urgent. And so I'll definitely check that out and check out what other options are there for that, because I'd like to at least have that option once in a while, even if I don't use it every day.
Yeah, or if you want the clients to think that you're really working and thinking about them at 11 o'clock at night, you can have the emails go out then.
I don't think I want to do that.
Then they're calling at 11.
But it is interesting, John, and I do think about this because I really want to model like good life balance, not just for my family, but also for the people I interact with in the professional world too. If people in my listening community are getting emails from me at 2 or 3 in the morning or something like that, which they're not, by the way, because I'm never up then. But I don't think that that doesn't model like good balance. And so I rarely email anyone that's a client, even personal, after 9 o'clock at night or anything like that, just because I want to spend that time really focused on family or reading or just kind of winding down the day, or I love just sitting and chatting with Bonnie, because we don't get to do that anywhere as much as we used to. And boy, if we can spend like an hour at night once in a while just having a long conversation about life, or about, we're both tech geeks, so we love talking about technology and just what's going on in our lives and friends. And that's the perfect end to the day for me. I love doing that. And so I don't want to be on email at, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Yeah. I realize this is kind of going back to something we were talking about earlier, but we mentioned the idea of the 3 words, your 3 words. Yep. First of all, we should probably explain what they are, but we also didn't talk about what our 3 words are for the year. So maybe that would be a good way of kind of wrapping that up.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. And I did a podcast about a year ago, and I'll put a link to it in the notes, where this is a concept, I think originally from Chris Brogan, who had kind of said, have 3 words that you kind of are living your life around this year and focused on in order to get what you want and to keep your life fairly balanced. And so I mentioned my 3 from last year. So my 3 for this year are... actually, there are 4 words, because one of them is 2 words: launch, speak up, and study. And so launch is because I am working on the first course for the Coaching for Leaders community. So that's a big part of one of my goals for this year. It's one of my 10 big goals. And so I'm all about getting that launched and off, and that's a really important goal for a lot of reasons. So I'm working actively on that right now. So that's where that comes from. Speak up is to remind me to speak up when I have something of value to add in a conversation or an interaction, professionally or personally. I tend to be a pretty quieter personality by nature. I'm more of an introvert, and so I found recently that I want to do more of speaking up and actually engaging in conversations when I have something to say. So that's a reminder for me to do that on a more of a daily basis kind of reminder. And then the third one is study. I have vastly grown my goal this year for how much I want to read. And it'll be a little challenging at the beginning of the year with our daughter showing up in a month. But after that, I really want to do a lot more reading this year, because I think it'll be of real value to my professional development, staying current in my field. I think it'll be really value to my audience. And I just love to read. I love books, and I love knowing what's out there. So 15 books this year is my goal, John.
That's a good goal. You've got a great resource on your website, the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others. And I highly recommend that people going to Coaching for Leaders and downloading that. And I'll make one more recommendation, because it wasn't on there. This is a relatively recent book that just came out, Give and Take by Adam Grant. Have you read that yet?
I haven't, but it's one of the 15 that I'll read. It is, I've heard great things about it, and I hope at some point to actually have him on the Coaching for Leaders show too.
Yeah, me as well. It's excellent. It really, there's books which you do recommend, like How to Win Friends and Influence People, which you and I have been heavily influenced by. And there's also Intuition. I think you and I both see eye to eye on an attitude of, if you go through life helping people, giving more than you get, not expecting something in return, that it will pay off in the long run. And a lot of people do that. But what Adam Grant does in Give and Take is he actually provides the social science research. He backs it up with all kinds of research and studies that have been done that actually demonstrates that people who are givers are the ones who rise to the top of the success ladder if they don't become a doormat, if they don't allow themselves to be taken advantage of by the takers out there in the world. So it really breaks it down well. It's a great book. I'd highly recommend that one.
I love it.
But I love your 3 words too. I mean, that's a great breakdown. And I love that you've already got a doctorate, and the man's goal is to study. Like you haven't studied enough.
I'm probably done with university degrees, but I hope that I'm never done learning. I love to learn. I love to teach. And I'm always so excited when I see a new book come out. I was listening to Bonnie was watching a show last night, and there was a book out on there's a new book out on Pope Francis, and I'm not Catholic, but I just am really impressed with the new Pope and just some of the leadership concepts and servant leadership that he has brought already to the work he's done. And I'm like, oh, I'd love to read that book. And I've already got a list of like 25 long. I'm like, I'm not going to have time to read all these books this year, but I just love learning.
Well, you know what I did that made a big difference is I started reading in the car, reading books on tape. And now I have a short commute. It's only about 20 minutes. And 20 minutes, and I get through 2 books a month on just driving around town, listening to books on tape, either through audible.com or through getting books from the library. I've been able to get through about 2 books a month, just through those alone.
I used to do it, and for whatever reason, my brain's not working on audiobooks anymore, and I really wanted to like take notes and highlight things. And as soon as someone comes out with some great technology for me to be able to highlight an audiobook and archive that, I am going to do it. The other challenge, I don't have a commute anymore, John. I'm rarely on the road, so my commute's about 20 feet most days.
Yeah.
And so, which is great, but it also has had the interesting side effect of I don't have as much time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks and things like that either. Yeah. So I've really had to be more intentional about making time for that. Speaking of which, intentionality, do you have 3 words as well, or 3 things you're focusing on? I know you mentioned that, or I don't know if you had done any thinking on that.
I do, yeah. And so the 3 words that I chose for 2014, which I have the blog post drafted but haven't published it yet, are plan, which I mentioned earlier, write, and give. And planning is, been instrumental to everything I've been able to accomplish over the last 18 months or so, because I really wasn't a great planner, or I didn't really focus on planning before that. In the last 18 months, I've really doubled down on it. And I think it allows me to get a lot more accomplished than I did before. Writing, I've always been a writer since I was about 10 years old. It's always been something that's been in me, but I want to share my writing more with the world. I want to write more for different places. And so if anyone listening to this has followed me before or follows me on social media, you see I write for a lot of different sites out there and a lot of different places. And I enjoy doing that. I enjoy having someone new in some new venue who discovers something I've written, finds some value in it, and reaches out to me. So, and when I've focused on that, that's always been a great way of providing value to other people. And that leads to my 3rd word, which is give, which is influenced by Give and Take by Adam Grant.
Awesome.
And after reading that book, I said, you know what? I'm just going to focus on giving. And in the theory of the book, at least, and which is really well documented, is that if you do that, then rewards will come back to you.
Well, and I should point out that you actually sparked the idea for this conversation initially because you had sent me an email to help make a connection for me, for my community. And so you're practicing what you're preaching right at the beginning of the year here. And that actually led to us talking more and then talking about the topic for this conversation. So I think it's just, it's great how that's driven your behavior already and some cool things already coming out of it.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect example, right?
Yeah, awesome. So so for people who normally listen to my show, how should people get a hold of you? Where should people go? And maybe you can say something about your book too.
People who are listening to this on your show can
it's a little confusing.
Yeah, really confusing. So my website is smartbusinessrevolution.com, and you know what I'll do is I'll just I'll set up a welcome page. I can't remember if I did that last time when I was on your podcast.
You did.
Okay, so I probably have that from before, so we can link that in the show notes. It probably was smartbusinessrevolution.com/coaching for leaders.
It is. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can go there and you can grab a copy of my ebook, which as of last checked, it was called How to Create Your Personal Networking Plan, but I am actually retitling it, so it might be named something else. But the point behind the ebook is how to reach out to people who you know or who you don't know, VIPs, top performers, that sort of thing, and develop relationships with people and then use them in a way that is win-win and that can lead to more clients, customers, and revenues for you personally. And it's something that I'm passionate about. A lot of people call it networking, but that's kind of a negative term that a lot of people, there's a whole nother discussion, but a lot of people have a negative connotation with it. But really what it's about is about using relationships, developing sincere, genuine human relationships with people in order to propel your business forward. So I hope people check it out. And for those who are listening to this through my podcast and are first hearing about Dave, where can people check you out?
Well, thank you, John. And I should say for folks in my audience, one thing too is for those of you who haven't listened to John before on the previous episode 106, John's got a great book, lots of tools and resources, and he used to work at the White House for President Clinton, so he knows a thing or two about how to make connections with people. So it's great stuff. And thank you, John, for the opportunity. It's my website's coachingforleaders.com, and the community is really for people who want to be more effective leaders, but weren't necessarily trained for that, and have expertise in something else, but now are in a leadership role and want to get better at their communications, human relations, and personal productivity. And the list you mentioned earlier, John, is actually a great way to start. So there's a free reader's guide on the 10 leadership books that'll help you get better results from others. coachingforleaders.com/subscribe is how you get it. And that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave. This was fun.
Hey, it was fun, and we could talk for another 2 hours, but my calendar says at some point here I've got to go make sure Luke's doing well. So speaking of work-life balance.
And we know we can't break that calendar, so.
Exactly. Couldn't be flexible, right?
Right. All right, great. Thank you, Dave.
Hey, it's been fun, John. Thank you. My question for you after listening to this conversation is, what's one new idea that you've gained from our conversation that'll help you to achieve better work-life balance? And if you'd like to answer that question and join our conversation about this episode, just go to coachingforleaders.com/123. That'll take you to the show notes for this episode, give you a chance to answer that question. Or you could wait for the weekly update for those of you who are on the weekly update this coming Wednesday, and there will be a link there as well to join the conversation. And of course, if you have comments, questions, or feedback, either about anything related to this show or for a future episode, coachingforleaders.com/feedback is a great way to submit feedback to me. And you may remember that John also has a podcast. It's called Smart Business Revolution. And so you can check him out online as well. I'll have a link to all of his stuff in the show notes, but he helps entrepreneurs and small businesses bring in more clients, customers, and revenue. So if that's something that sounds of interest to you, definitely check him out online. Hey, one resource that I realized after our conversation that I didn't mention, you may have heard me speak about of having a goal to read 15 books this year. And one of the resources that I use for tracking my reading these days is called Goodreads. And you can get to it at goodreads.com. I believe they are owned by Amazon, if I am correct. But you can go there and you can actually add me as a friend or find my reading list and what I'm reading and have read recently. And if you'd like to do that, just go to coachingforleaders.com/Goodreads. That will take you directly there to my list. And, one book that I'm currently reading along toward my goals, Bonnie and I actually read it together. I haven't finished it yet. It's called The Secrets of Happy Families by Bruce Feiler. It's really been an interesting read about some of the research out there and also just the stories about what our families doing that are really happy and successful. And one of the ideas I've already pulled from this book and we've implemented in our family in a real practical way, I think, is getting out of the mindset of that family time can only be at the dinner table each evening. I think a lot of us, at least here in the States, I know the culture used to be very much that everyone got together for dinner time. And if you couldn't get together for dinner time, you didn't get together. And he really he says, that's great in the book, but he also challenges people to say, if dinner time doesn't work for your family, pick another time of the day that it makes sense to get people together. And while we do often get together for dinner in our family, we actually almost always, 100% of the time, get together for breakfast and spend a good hour as a family connecting at breakfast, regardless of what's going on in people's schedules. It is incredibly rare that one of us isn't around for a good hour or so for breakfast every morning, and we have time to connect there. And that's really been helpful of just changing our mindset on getting out of, something has to be a certain way just because that's the family we grew up with or that's what the neighbors do. And I mention that book because I think it's really helpful on challenging some of our assumptions about work-life balance. And I know I have a lot of baggage around it that I bring from, family and from just seeing how other people have done stuff. And it really challenges us to think creatively. And I think that's a big thing with work-life balance, is being able to think creatively of what is going to work for you in your situation, in your family, in your work. And that answer is different for everyone. So my greatest hope for all of us coming away from this conversation today is just that it would challenge you to think differently, even if it's something completely different than what John and I spoke about or brought up on the show. But if it sparks an idea for you to try something different with your family that brings more balance, brings more quality time, then that's fantastic. And I'd love to hear about it if you do something differently that is helpful to you. Hey, a quick reminder before I let you go this week, episode 125 coming up in 2 weeks is going to be an all question and answer show on time management. And so that's very much related to our topic today. So if you have a question for me on different time management systems you could use, how to utilize and manage your task list, how do you approach best practices around managing your time and resources, if you're running into obstacles, if you're looking for more resources around that, and of course, if you're looking for ways to either systematize or to start to think creatively around work-life balance, there are things that have worked for me. There are also many things that haven't. And I'm going to pull out my resources and tackle as many questions as I can during that episode. So if you have a question and would like to have your question considered for that episode, go to coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and that is the very best way for you to submit a question. I would love to get an audio question. That way I can play it on the episode here. Hey, a huge thank you this week to Nusrat Khan, Shannon Chisano, Johanna Alvarado, Arthur Kugat, Pam Davis, Chow Fan, Jacob Abanga, Ian Butcher, John Corcoran, hey John, Maria Augustin, Melissa Dixon, someone named Jenny, hi Jenny, Brian Riddak, James Drake, Rob Root, Brian Myers, and Lorraine Clark, who all subscribed to my weekly update in the past week. Thank you to all of you. I do publish that weekly update every Wednesday. It'll give you an update between shows with an article on how to lead better and give you some good advice and some resources on getting better at your communication, human relations, or productivity. Plus, as of now, the show notes for every episode. So all the links, everything John and I talked about, the resources are all going to be in that. So you'll get that on Wednesday as well. If you'd like to get that in your inbox too, just go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. Plus, you'll also get instant access to my video overview and a nice downloadable, about 10-page PDF on the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others, plus a little synopsis of each of those books. It'll help you to start your reading list for this year. So if reading is a goal of yours, I'd really encourage you to check that out as well. It'll give you a great place to start. Hey, a huge thank you as well to the person named Marla R. for your very kind written review on Stitcher this past week. Marla, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. If this show's been valuable to you as well, if you take a moment this week to write a written review, either on iTunes or Stitcher, depending on which directory you use, and if you use another directory and they allow for reviews, I'd be grateful for that too. You can get to the iTunes one, coachingforleaders.com/iTunes, or Stitcher at coachingforleaders.com/Stitcher. And heads up on the Stitcher, for Stitcher folks, for some reason it just isn't really friendly on letting you do that on mobile devices. So check it out with the website, coachingforleaders.com/Stitcher, and that'll get you there. Hey, have a great week, everyone, and I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.